Now we're going to talk about this particular thing, the hem of his garment. And shows up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this story. Everybody know it? Issue of blood, right? We're going to read it, but there's more to it than what you think. Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood for 12 years had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing better, but rather grew worse. When she had heard of Jesus, she came in and pressed behind, and touched the hem of his garment. For she said, if I may touch his clothes, I will be made whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the plague. Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned around in the press and said, who touched my clothes? Who touched me? And the disciple said to him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what she had done in her, what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him the truth. And he said unto her, daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Right? Familiar with that. Crowds of people trying to get to Jesus. She makes her way through, touches the hem of the garment, and she's healed by her faith. But there's more to the story. Like Paul Harvey says, now for the rest of the story. This is the image that we think of this, okay? And this is a nice image, but it's not accurate, okay? First of all, we have to understand that Jesus was the Word made flesh. Jesus had to obey all God's laws from the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. He quoted from them. He couldn't be the Messiah if he did not obey the laws of God. Right? So that was the Word of God made flesh. He could not disobey his Father. Correct? This woman, being a Jew, would have known what that was too. In those days, whenever someone was unclean, they couldn't touch anybody. They couldn't be around. They had to walk through the streets yelling, unclean, unclean, so people would move. They would depart, so they wouldn't touch her. So I'm going to read where this is important. It's in Leviticus. Leviticus, I'll read it quick. You don't have to go there because this is very detailed. Leviticus 15. If a woman, it's a biology class, if a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she shall be set apart for 7 days. And whosoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything that she lies on during her impurity shall be unclean. Also everything that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches the bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything that she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. If anything is on her bed or on anything on which she sits, when she touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. And if any man lies with her at all, so that her impurity is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days. And every bed on which he lies is unclean. The very specific rules. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than the time of her customary impurity, or if it runs beyond her usual time of impurity, this is the situation that this lady was in. All of the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her customary impurity. She shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies, all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, and whatever she sits on shall be unclean. I think he's beating this down. This is going to be an unclean. As the uncleanliness of her impurity. Whosoever touches these things shall be unclean. He shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. See? So, other words, this cycle in those days, you don't touch anybody. Nobody's supposed to touch you. And it was set aside because they didn't have the medicine that we have now. People didn't have the access to stuff that we have to avoid this. Are you already seeing what happened? She was unclean and she touched Jesus, which by Levitical law makes him unclean. Right? That uncleanliness went on him. There's a foreshadow of the cross. This is what happens. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest, or to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And the priest shall offer one up as a sin offering and one as a burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, because the Lord of the discharge, to the Lord for the discharge of her uncleanness. So after she's healed, she waits, and then she takes sacrifice to the priest, who makes a sacrifice for her. He makes a sin atonement for her. So if we think about this, right, don't think about this. We need to talk about what she actually touched. And I have one right here. This is the prayer shawl. This is what Jesus would have had on. They wear them like this. On the corners of the garments right here are the tassels with the blue threads like these. This one doesn't have blue thread on it, but this is commanded to be made in Leviticus for God's people. So we're going to read that. Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make fringes on the borders of their garment throughout their generations, and that they put the fringes, the borders, and a ribbon of blue. Okay? Jesus would have had to wear one of these because he was a child of Israel. These prayer shawls, even today, Jews will go up to the Wailing Wall. They'll have one of these on. They'll hold the tassels. These tassels are what they hold to pray. These tassels represent authority. These tassels represent their private conversations with God when they put these things on and they pray. They hold these. Right? The corners of this are called the wings. The tassels are connected to the wings. So think about, and Samuel. Then the men of David said to him, This is the day which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy out of your hand, and that you may do to him as it seems good to you. And David arose and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. This was the authority. David cut off his corner and said, I have your authority now. I'm next in line. I have this. It's kind of the way, if you're familiar with the way Native Americans used to fight. They had what's called a coup stick, and they would get in these battles, and they would get close enough, and they would take this wooden stick, and they would hit somebody under the ribs or in the neck or the head, and that means I could have killed you, but I didn't. And then that person would have to be either his slave or servant. That's how this thing works. They took pride in the corners of their garments because God told them to do that. So when that woman was fighting through the crowd, which she knew she wasn't allowed to do, she was unclean, everybody that she was going to touch was going to be unclean. And she was getting ready to touch what she knew as a rabbi and grab a hold of his authority and touch the master's authority. And then he said, what happened? This prophecy is fulfilled here. Malachi 4:2. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and he shall go forth and grow up as calves in the calves of the stall. She grabbed this. The more accurate picture would be that. She fought her way and she aimed for what she knew was the master's authority. And then he said, whoa, it just left me. All those prayers that I prayed and stored up went into her. And what else happened? She was supposed to, when she came clean, make a sacrifice to the priest. But she just touched the priest. And she didn't have to take the turtle doves to the temple because he said, go your way. You've just been made whole. He bypassed all of that because he was that. He took her uncleanness on him and cleansed her of it immediately. She didn't have to do the ritual sacrifice because it just happened right there. And she knew, I have to work for this. I have to fight my way through the crowd and get up to where I know I'm not supposed to be and grab a hold of the authority of the master. And that's what caused Jesus to say, okay, you worked for it. You got it.